I've been very fortunate throughout my life to have a lot of great people that have been part of my team and have supported me, and that over and above anything else, Tim, that's what gets me going every day. It's you need to deliver financially, but it's amazing how when you get the actual chemistry right, the financial deliverance is just a byproduct of high quality delivery safely, efficiently, with a team that really enjoys doing it right.
Welcome to Euroz Hartleys Finding the Front, where we get to know the people who front some of Western Australia's leading companies, providing you with real insights into the way they think and approach things, both in business and in life. So get the volume adjusted in your car or your headphones sorted and settle in for a great story. Here's your host, Tim Banfield.
Hey everyone, and thanks for joining us for a brand new episode of Euroz Hartleys Finding the Front. For those of you who are not familiar with Euroz Hartleys is a proudly Western Australian financial services business. We specialise in the provision of corporate finance, private wealth management, institutional sales and targeted research services. If you'd like to learn more about Euroz Hartleys and the services we provide, please don't hesitate to visit our website at www.eurozhartleys.com. Well, our very special guest for this two-part episode is Murray Leahy, founder and executive chair of Kalgoorlie-based integrated mining services and resource asset management company MLG Oz, stock code MLG. This conversation is wide-ranging and provides deep and unique insights into building a business in Murray's beloved goldfields, our mining industry, a detailed look at the costs of production, including the role of the ancillary or servicing costs in the delivery of product, and the importance of planning. Plus, the opportunities and the challenges facing a rapidly expanding gold sector, all coming from a person who lives and breathes it. Murray also shares an honest and open perspective and insight into family, life, and an immense connection to community. Muzz, as he is affectionately known, is very highly regarded, and MLG now forms part of the lifeblood of the Western Australian gold mining industry. He is humble, but the sort of guy who, when he speaks, people listen. This two-part episode, right to the very end, reveals a journey and a mindset that you can't help but absolutely admire. So, without further ado, it gives me a massive pleasure to introduce to Euroz Hartleys Finding the Front, the founder and executive chair of MLG Oz and all-round great bloke, Murray Leahy. Muzz, thanks for joining us on Euroz Hartleys Finding the Front. It seriously is great, mate, to have you on the show, and I'm really, really looking forward to the chat.
Thanks for the opportunity to come along, Banners. Looking forward to sharing my story and hopefully being able to provide a bit of an oversight as to my life and my world at MLG.
Good on you, mate. Good on you. Well, look, for everyone, I just want to set the scene. Murray is a founder of MLG Oz, which he kicked off in Kalgoorlie back in 2002 with one employee. The mighty goldfields town of Kalgoorlie has never looked the same. After 24 years, it's now an ASX-listed company. It employs over 1,500 people in some 39 locations across WA and the Northern Territory. Astoundingly, it is running over 1,470 heavy vehicles and support equipment. Over this time, MLG Oz has become and remains a key integrated logistics and support provider that keeps WA and now the Northern Territory's mining operations moving efficiently. Not only that, but I know personally, Muzz, that you are an admired and respected bloke, not only in the goldfields but across the industry as a whole. Combine the two, and it's a showcase of what can be achieved when you put your mind to it. And, you know, the words like grit, good people, relentless drive, meets endurance sort of thing comes together, and it's MLG Oz is pretty vital towards keeping your clients which includes some of Australia's largest resource companies moving forward. It's just huge. In saying all that, Finding the Front is all about learning a bit about what has shaped you, and I'm really keen and excited about that, given I grew up in the wheat belt in a place called Querriting. You grew up in Pingelly.
I did, mate. I did, just down the road from Querriting. So tiny little community with sort of 500-600 people in it, and bounced between a farm and town, and yes, and got to be exposed and enjoy all the things that come with a country upbringing, right?
So tell us about that country upbringing. You know, you're out on the farm. I understand the family farm, which was your dad and mum, and brothers and sisters.
So I've got, I guess, a few generations of farmers.
Yeah.
So my dad's side were farming just to the east of Pingelly at a place called Alderside.
Yep.
My mum's family were farming over at a little place called Doodinnon over near Wickepin, and both large, typically baby boomer families. You know, 6 and 7 kids in each one, and my dad was the oldest of 5 boys, 2 girls, and actually, I got that wrong. It's 4 boys and 2 girls.
Yeah.
In a family that, I guess was a soldier settler block, and they had to work really hard when they came along. So my grandfather farmed that farm right up until the point that he handed it over to one of my uncles, my dad's youngest brother. But as kids, we grew up very much between the farm and town, and it was 10 mile or 16 k's out to the farm, and we'd quite often get on our bikes as kids and pedal all the way out there and collapse on Nana's floor and get her to give us a big feed of something, and before we'd go about conducting all sorts of adventures, from building forts to hunting rabbits to trapping rabbits to being on the machinery with Grandad, and it was a sensational upbringing. Loved it.
Do you remember learning how to drive, Muzz?
Yeah, I do remember learning how to drive out wood cutting with my dad one day in his HQ Holden ute, and the ute needed to be shifted, and I can't remember how old I was. I was young. Like, the good part about that upbringing, Ben, is everyone gets exposed to things really young, right? So I wasn't old enough or wasn't big enough to be able to reach the pedals and see over the steering wheel, but I said, the ute's got to be moved, Dad. Well, if you want to move it, get in and move it, I didn't want to cart the wood, 50 metres to the ute, and the old man wasn't stopping with the chainsaw. So when I got, and I worked out really quick that when you drive the throttle to the floor and you slam the ute into a big tree, the old man gets pretty wild, right? So, but that was my first exposure. And I guess I would have been 9 or 10 at that point in time.
Yeah,
so.
yeah. Farming itself is a great grounding for life in general. Growing crops, running livestock, machinery. What was the parts of farming that sort of really grabbed you?
I think that the key piece, and we had a combination of where the wider family group was farming, but my dad was obviously in trucks from the moment I was born. He already owned trucks, and so we sat across both, and what that sort of taught us was, I guess, the capacity to understand risk, to understand the challenges and adversity that comes with dealing with weather and all of those things that get thrown upon you as when you're part of being involved working in the land. But also it develops a level of fortitude and grit that I think, for me personally, I look back and reflect on now, and I learned to work hard. I learned to set a goal and don't let small obstacles get in the way of that. And it's been those elements that I've carried forward into my adult life and have really helped me become who I am today. So.
Yeah, yep. The trucking side of the business. So your dad started out livestock, or was he carting grain?
So Dad was on the farm, obviously, but given the size of the family, he sort of was always very driven to work for himself. He was a shearer, so worked really hard through his teenage years to just save enough money to get ahead to build his own business, and went out and bought his own truck in the sort of the early 70s, and was working both on the farm but also carting grain and carting stock and doing anything and everything to be able to make a buck.
Yep.
Obviously met my mum. Dad actually went to Vietnam. They met my mum coming back from Vietnam, and they got married and started the business and bought the first truck and based out of Pingelly, and it was all agricultural related work. So grain season, he'd be carting grain. When he wasn't carting grain, he'd be carting stock. he'd be carting a fair bit of hot super in the day, as they called it. When all the rail embargoes are in and you weren't allowed to cart superphosphate back out of Perth, he'd be doing all sorts of stuff to duck and weave in the night to get super back out into his client base and try and make a few bucks and snip the rail along the way. So, immensely hard workers, immensely driven, and committed to doing everything they could do to get themselves ahead.
And that started, he bought his first truck and obviously got to a point where he decided there was more opportunity to head into the goldfields. And that obviously had a big impact on the whole family.
It did. There was a bit of a deviation prior to that. So in 79, when I would have been 5 at the time, they actually went into the Pilbara and went to work for an organisation, a quarrying organisation, very similar to the business that we have nowadays, actually. So, out of Karratha at the time, and it wasn't a success. It resulted in doing a lot of work and not being paid, and had sort of 2.5 years in Karratha, and resulted in us having to retreat back to the little sleepy hollow of Pingelly after a really challenging financial period. And little things like I can remember, being a little kid in the ute and Dad's down at the rubbish tip and rifling through truck tyres to get enough truck tyres to keep the trucks going and so forth, because he just wasn't being paid. Yeah. And resulted in an ensuing sort of large court case and a long protracted legal battle that ultimately they won and got paid their money, but did put the family through a whole bunch of stress for a long period of time. So wound up back in Kalgoorlie, sort of end of 81, start of 82, somewhere there. And then, wound up back in Pingelly, not in Kalgoorlie, back in Pingelly, sort of around 81, 82. And back to the roots. So the old man was back, working within the agricultural industry, sort of delivering grain and stock and all those kind of things. In and out of Perth, doing a bit of sand type movement work. So he did all the sand in and out of the Wacker establishment when it was redeveloped. Mum still got pictures of us kids, us 3 little boys standing at the Wacker pitches. They're laying the grass and the old man's tipping sand off in the background. Good. Did all the Freo redevelopment for the America's Cup and sort of bounced backwards and forwards. So got to see a whole bunch of stuff as a kid. So.
Quite an exciting upbringing, really, when you think about it in that regard. But, for him, he obviously stuck at it, loved what he did, and was going to do everything he could to make sure it was a success. Yeah,
very much so. And look, it's sort of, so we had that period from 82 through to 87. And the gold price was starting to move, and the agricultural sector was going through a really tough period of time. And given what had gone on in the Pilbara, the reluctance for Mum to want to trundle off to a mining environment again wasn't that high. No. But Dad very much saw that the opportunity that would exist, both not only for his business but for his 3 growing boys. He sort of looked at that farming environment and thought this is going to be a tough existence, small country town and so forth. He had 3 kids that, in myself and my 2 brothers, that he knew we were capable, but he also knew that none of us were Rhodes Scholars, right? So we're going to need to do something with our hands. And so, he convinced Mum that it was time to go and try something different again. And he packed up and headed off to Kalgoorlie on the 27th of July, 1987, which happened to be his 40th birthday, in a very challenging financial situation, and commenced work on his 40th birthday to start rebuilding their own empire.
Oh, my goodness. So he landed in Cal just before the 87 crash, in essence.
Yeah, 87 crash, but also spike in gold price, right? So, the first of the gold CIP plants or CIL plants were being built. Gold price had shot as part of the crash, and there was a whole bunch going on, but it was a Wild West town in those days. It was very rough and tumble.
So let's just move from there. I mean, you went to primary school in Pingelly. Then you ended up in Narrogin.
Yeah, so did year 1 to year 7. Well, started actually primary school in Karratha, and then finished my primary school in Pingelly before being sent off to boarding school at the Narrogin Government Hostel. Did a year there, so year 8, and then across that. So that was sort of 1988, 87, 88. And then after a fair bit of convincing, Mum decided that it was time to pack the whole family up and follow Dad to Kalgoorlie, and we headed off to Kalgoorlie, and I went into Year 9 in Cal.
And how did you find school, Muzz? I mean, I'll be up front. You left when you were 14.
I did. As I sort of alluded to before, Banners, school was never really my thing. I was never an academic learner. Great with my hands, great at being able to problem solve and see a situation in front of me. But the capacity to be able to sit in a classroom and study all day, every day is just something that I was never wired to be able to do. And Mum and Dad said to us, rightio, if you want to leave school, you need to go and get an apprenticeship. So I got to the end of Year 9 and I started pedalling. I was looking as hard as I could go and managed to land an apprenticeship with a company that was called KLV at the time, Kalgoorlie Lakeview, as a Boilermaker welder. Very shortly thereafter, it merged to become KCGM. So I walked into a place called the Perseverance Shaft, which now sits firmly within the Super Pit, right behind the back door of the Boulder Block Hotel, and started a 4-year apprenticeship as a 14-year-old as a Boilermaker welder. The other thing that my dad said in quite stern words, and one thing about my old man is, you always knew where you stood. There's never any grey with Timmy. It was black or white, and nowhere in between. And he was very crystal clear with all of us. If you take something on, you commit to it and you finish it. To be completely honest, the concept of being a Boilermaker was lost on me within about 6 months of being in the trade. I knew that it was something I wasn't going to do for the rest of my life. However, I committed to doing it, and I was going to stick with it. And interestingly, there's a whole bunch of skills that I learned through that I still carry forward today and use every day in what I do. So I'm immensely thankful for the opportunity that was provided to me and the people that taught me through that period. And I'm also very thankful for the fact that my mum and dad held me to account and said, no, you're not walking away from it.
Yeah. And that's half the battle is sticking at it.
Absolutely. I think one of their biggest challenges, and we could go down a rabbit hole with this, but fortitude today is something that lacks, I think, across our society. And life's full of challenges, and the reality of it is it's all about the journey, right? It's the twists and turns and challenges along the way that really make you who you are and build resilience and skills and create enjoyment and challenge in your life. And I think we get very focused on the destination and not necessarily the journey nowadays. I think that's a challenge.
Yeah, very valid point. Well, you ended up completing your Boilermaker apprenticeship, and at the same time your old man was still doing the trucking.
Correct.
And he was doing he had a haulage business in essence, which was then working with Western Mining in nickel.
Yep.
So you had a bit of a conversation at that point, I understand, on what your future was going to look like.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a gap in there where I guess like all teenage boys, I finished my apprenticeship, and by this point in time, Mum and Dad had worked really hard and were starting to create a more comfortable life for themselves. And I was having a fair bit of fun. I was out prospecting. Finished my apprenticeship, spending a heap of time swinging a metal detector. Fair bit of time.
How'd you go?
Yeah, no, I've done pretty well along the way. Yeah. Spent a fair bit of time shooting kangaroos actually for both pet meat and human consumption. So did all the things that I wanted to do, right?
Ticked a few boxes.
Got out around, spent plenty of time fishing and having a great time until one day the old man just said, "No, it's time you pulled your head in and actually started doing some work." And so I came back, and interestingly enough, I whilst I'd grown up in a family where business was talked about every day around the table, and mum and dad sort of ran that business together. And we were exposed to it from a very young age. Like my dad had us driving trucks from 13 and 14 years of age. Like the boys having weekends off, and we were sitting in a truck steering it, right? Yep. So things you can't do nowadays, but it happened all the time, and we did lots of it. And I loved doing it too, by the way. I was, as a little kid, sitting in this big truck marching up and down. It was great fun, and I couldn't wait to get back there the next time. But through that period, learnt all these skills, but I actually had no desire to be involved in anything transport related. I looked at how hard Mum and Dad had done it over such a long period of time, and I was just like, well, there's got to be an easy way to go about this.
Yeah.
And that's with no disrespect to my mum and dad. They're amazing individuals, amazingly committed, but there is the things that you control and the things that you can't control, and sometimes the things that you can't control have a big influence on what you can control. And
yes.
And I watched the challenges of Karratha and the agricultural sector and getting established in Kalgoorlie and how hard they worked. So I had no interest in going anywhere back near a truck, and but had built a skill around operating and understanding how to maintain and so forth. And I was actually shooting kangaroos for an old guy called Bob Granger out of Kalgoorlie.
Yeah.
And his son Peter had trucks. And Peter rang me one day and said, I'm stuck for someone. Can you come and give me a hand for a couple of weeks? And yeah, righto, but only a couple of weeks. I'm not interested in driving trucks. I want nothing to do with trucks, mate. As a bloody 18-year-old, I'd had that much to do with trucks. I was done in my own mind. So 1 week turned into 1 month, turned into 2 years, and next thing I'm sucked back in. And so it was actually someone else outside of the family and away from my dad that drew me back into that, logistics and mining services business. Yeah.
So you did that for a couple of years? Did
that for a few years, and worked for a multitude of people actually. So stint with Peter Granger. There was a quite an instrumental guy in the goldfields through that period of time called Doug Gould that was sort of leading the charge with sort of the integrated logistics model, and was starting to build a business, and from a technology perspective was quite cutting edge. And I thought, well, that's where I want to be. I want to go and sort of learn from this guy. And so I spent a few years with him, and then one day out of the blue, in about, I think it must have been late 99 and 2000, that Dad rang me and said, hey, there's an opportunity here to further their scope of works with what was the Western Mining Nickel business.
Yes.
And take on a silica sand mining and haulage task. And as part of that, we would need to go and buy some assets. So I came back and entered the family business again, and we went about tendering that piece of work to bring effectively a new division in based upon the skills that I'd developed outside of Mum and Dad's family
with
business.
Peter and then
with Peter
yep.
and then Doug Gould and
Yep.
so forth, and commence this operation. And that's how I wound up back working with Mum and Dad and getting entwined in the family business again. So.
Just Muzz, that's fascinating. With the family business at this point, just give us an idea on scale. How many trucks are you running?
So it was more earth-moving fleet. So
Right.
they were Mum and Dad's business, sort of 15 to 20 employees, permanently based at the Kalgoorlie Nickel Smelter, doing all of the very boutique task-related stuff. So they handled all of the molten slag on site. So the slag would come out of the furnace as lava.
Yep.
They had special pot carriers that we developed all the work methodologies for. We'd cart the stuff away from the furnace, tip it off. We'd manage all the dumps, do all the integrated related stuff. This last piece was, Dad had transitioned away from trucks. He still had a few trucks, but it was predominantly earth moving fleet by that point in time.
Right.
This was a branch out, with me coming back into the business, was a branch out back into, the on-road logistics piece. So I went and bought a new road train and commenced the task after successfully winning it.
Yeah, okay. I was looking and doing a bit of research, and, obviously approaching 2021, if we just fast track quickly and say MLG's approaching listing. There was an article written by the AFR, Australian Financial Review, and I took an excerpt out of it because it really, I thought, captured so well where you were at. And the headline is, truck driver who left school at 14 hits top gear with $148 million listing. Brad Thompson, May 3rd, 2021. And this the snap out of it, I just wanted to reiterate for the listeners. We quickly worked out that while we were good mates, we couldn't work together, Mr. Leahy recalls, which is obviously Muzz talking about his dad. Dad grabbed me in the yard one day and said, "You're either buying out this side of the business or you're leaving. You make up your mind."
Word for word, that's how it happened.
He goes, I trotted off at 25 to NAB in Kalgoorlie and begged for $850,000. And fortunately, they were accommodating enough to put plenty of mortgages around my neck and lent me the money. And that was where MLG was born. I'd always had the desire to work for myself, but my dad forced my hand to a degree. My dad is 6'4" and of strong Irish Catholic descent, and diplomacy was never his strong point. I'm forever grateful that he taught me really strong fundamentals from the get-go. There was nothing for nothing. You needed to plan, protect, assess risk. It was really his way of ensuring I was geared to be able to run a business. I just thought that was absolutely wonderful.
It's pretty accurate. There's probably a little bit of poetic license in that article, but in a nutshell, that's pretty well what happened, right? It was I was required to take some debt on. The structure that Mum and Dad put in place, albeit at the time I thought was really harsh. I look back now and it really set me on a road for success. You know, we sat across the kitchen table and the exact words that Dad used as he looked at me and offered me an opportunity, and that's I was offered an opportunity.
Yep.
I wasn't gifted anything. I was offered an opportunity where he said, unless you have worn the skin off your guts crawling through the gravel, my boy, you will never really understand and appreciate what it's like to have those scabs healed and come out the other side a stronger and fitter person. I'll provide you the opportunity. The rest of it is up to you.
Yeah.
And ultimately, there's been some twists and turns along the way, but whilst I thought he was immensely harsh at the time, I look back at that now and go, he gave me the exact toolkit that I needed to get done what I needed to get done.
Yeah. Is your dad around still?
Both Mum and Dad are still around.
Yeah, fantastic. Oh, they must be very proud.
Yeah. I think we've got a strong family connection, and oldest of three boys. We're all very involved in each other's lives, and Mum and Dad are an immensely important part of it. But all three of us work for ourselves, so It's not just myself. My two brothers have both got their own businesses too, so and are successful in their own right, doing exactly what they've chosen to do. But ultimately, it's been the grounding, the guidance, and the holding to account that both Mum and Dad have put around the three of us boys that's resulted in our successes.
Fantastic, Muzz. It's so good to really learn about that, because obviously in this particular instance it is groundbreaking for you in terms of where you ended up, and it really did set the stage. It
did, but lots of people ask me, Banners, what was your plan? What was your strategy? How did you go about that?
Yeah.
It's the reality of a situation, or of my situation, is I can't stand back and say there was unequivocally a strict business plan. There was never really a business plan per se. There was a capacity/propensity to be able to work hard. There was an understanding that was an opportunity out there. But it was an evolutionary step-by-step process that just, you chew off one opportunity and you get to the end of it and go, bloody hell, that took a whole lot of chewing through. And then you just turn around and something else would come along that was bigger, so you'd bite off that and away you go too, right?
Yeah,
and ultimately, there's one of two things that happen. You either get really fit at chewing, or you fail, right? And roll over and die of a stomachache. So, fortunately, thus far, I've gotten pretty fit at chewing. So,
it's like that old saying: the harder you work, the luckier you get.
Labour under correct knowledge, mate. That's what luck stands for.
I love that one. I've heard that one. So, 2002, MLG was off and running, and your first contract, I understand, was with BHP.
It was, yes, yeah. So it was a task where, again, sliding doors moments, right? So if you can imagine, the nickel business that was Western Mining that then ultimately became BHP and is now closed. The very first task that we started was the mining of silica sand to the west of Coolgardie at a place called Mount Burgess. And Western Mining / then BHP had their own silica resource. And they were getting towards the end of life, and it was our job to mine it and truck it through to the nickel smelter, and they'd use it for flux in their furnace. I started looking at it going, this resource is running out.
Yep.
They're going to back themselves into a corner here. Fortuitously, I was at a point in time where there was a fair bit of ground starting to be shed. So the resources industry was going through a bit of a retraction, and I went through and started pegging tenements around what was the BHP sand tenement. And then started telling them, you're going to run out, guys, you're going to run out, guys, you're going to... And they did nothing about it, they did nothing about it. And what we did through that period of time, and I had some help from a great friend of mine, Andrew Pumphrys, who's running a listed entity of his own now, we went through and ran a resource program, discovered a high-quality silica resource in close proximity. As with most resource projects, good ones are found close to the ones that are already operating, right? So
Neurology.
Bit of neurology, yeah. Put it through the native title process, got a full mine established to coincide quite nicely with the BHP resource running out. So up until that point in time, I had been a subcontractor to Mum and Dad's business.
Yes.
So I trotted off to BHP and said, hey guys, you've run out. You better come and have a look at this. So we all got in the car together and we went out to site, and sure enough, oh shit, we've got no sand left. Yeah, well, how are we going to run a nickel business with no flux? So I've got that problem solved, guys. Just come next door here. So, and so that then enabled ourselves to be able to turn around and establish a direct relationship as a tier one contractor with the BHP as a business. And in hindsight, I didn't understand the gravitas of that at that point in time. But the reality of it is, it forced us down the road of thinking like a large contractor as a small contractor. And what I mean by that is, getting the appropriate structures in place, having the safety management systems in place. We had the tools of a larger entity existing and being operated in our business from a very, very early yes. stage, and that's because of that engagement with the BHP business then. So.
No, they wanted that as part of the service.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The entrepreneurial spirit came out pretty early, Muzz.
I knew from a very young age, Banners, that I would be working for myself. I didn't know what it was going to be, but I knew from the very get-go that I would work for myself, and I wasn't going to rest until it worked. Yep.
And then the vertical integration, in essence, of having the silica with the contract to haul it, that worked so well that it gave you the model.
It did. So, well, it was the inflection point to understand that there is a correlation or a shared set of services. So what it made me realise is I started looking at the construction materials needs, and what I mean by construction materials is sands and aggregates and lime and those kind of things through the whole of the resource industry. So obviously, started 2002, inked the first contract 2004, 2005, give or take. Can't remember the exact dates, but thereabouts. And then started looking at what was happening across the state. And there was nickel was actually starting to go quite well. There was a huge amount of ground support requirements, shotcrete for underground, right? So to support the roofs of the underground mines. And it was chewing a whole bunch of sand and a whole bunch of aggregate.
Yep.
Obviously had a sand resource at Coolgardie that we were mining, but I looked at it and went, well, where were these things being used? And the northern goldfields in particular was consuming huge amounts. So I then started looking at, well, how do we create a situation to be able to optimise fleet? And what I mean by that is, when I investigated it, what was happening is the whole of the goldfields regions were being serviced out of a sand pinning Kalgoorlie and a quarry in Kalgoorlie. And they were trucking aggregates and sand hundreds and hundreds of kilometres.
At a cost.
At a huge cost.
Yep.
But when I looked at the site services requirements of all of these processing facilities, they all had ore haulage road trains on site. Same trucks that get used to cart the aggregate and sand. They all had loaders, trucks, crushers doing contract crushing work. So by taking the quarry and the sand pit closer to the operations, you could then potentially leverage and flex fleet in a better way than what was being conducted. So I went off and started looking at where I could identify resources. And the first place I landed was just to the west of Leinster, at a little what we now call our Jonah Bore sand pit, just northwest of the Agnew gold mine, and pegged a sand resource that was dropped. And it was one of those situations, midnight pegging type thing. And Dad jumped in the car with me, and we roared off up and banged pegs in the ground. And
how did you know? Because there was no online system.
So, the 10 graph system existed then,
right.
But they'd have all the upcoming forfeitures. So I was living at night time. I was driving a truck during the day, living online at night time in the 10 graph system, just watching what was coming up from an anniversary and a shedding perspective. And then I'd typically 2 days a week, I'd start at like 3 o'clock in the morning rather than 6 o'clock in the morning, so I could get back into the mines department to look at the upcoming forfeitures and surrenders on the notice boards, right? So, and so I identified a huge amount of ground that we're still mining today through that process. So I would, identify this ground was coming up. Myself and Dad jumped in the car, roared off up there, banged some pegs in the ground, and established what is now our Jonah Bore sand pit that's been supplying effectively 3/4 of all of the shotcrete sand of the whole of the northern goldfields, from just south of Newman to south of Leonora for the last 20 years.
Oh, my goodness. That has been a lucrative find.
Yeah, so that wasn't the only one. So we also bought one online at Menzies. We opened a quarry at Leonora, and then went to the client base with a fully integrated model. So sort of around 2009-10, we had the old Barrack business at their Lawlers operation at Agnew.
Yep.
They had a series of contractors on site. Barrack decided to sell the operations. We had gone into Agnew, or Lawlers was called at the time, and we were conducting the site work. So we're supplying the aggregate and sand for their shotcrete underground, but we were also trucking the ore on site and flexing the fleet between the two. And that really proved to me that
so you could backhaul.
Well, not so much backhaul, but you could have a truck carting gold ore on site.
Yep.
And when there was a sand requirement or an aggregate requirement, you could shoot it off to the quarry and get it back. It didn't have to go all the way to Kalgoorlie, so you weren't paying for all that transport.
Got it.
And when you needed to do some work in the quarry, you could grab a loader out of site, rip it across to the quarry, which is only 10 k's away.
Yep.
Do the work, get it back. So you didn't have the carrying costs of the fleet. And it was starting to gain some momentum in my mind. This is actually a business model that could work and work really well. Then I can't remember the exact year, 12 or 13 somewhere, you had the Barrack Yulgarn assets were all sold and Goldfields bought them. The unique part about Agnew is you had two neighbouring operations working side by side, and they were effectively entwined. You had the Goldfields Agnew operation and the Barrack Lawlers operations, and they amalgamated to become one. And the GM at the time, a gentleman called Gary Mills, sat us down and went, look, Murray, understand you've been here for a long period of time, but we don't need your services anymore because we're not going to be trucking dirt down to Lawlers. Here's your termination for convenience letter. You need to pack up and leave. And I went, okay, Gary, thank you. And Gary, for those of you that have been in the industry, he's a straight shooting guy. He's been around for years and knows how to run an operation, but is also not scared to make a tough decision when it's got to be made. And in their view at the time, they said they weren't going to need the services that we were offering, probably without truly understanding the scope and service. So I went away and I actually went up onto the waste dump at Agnew, and I sat there for the best part of 3/4 of a day, and I was watching the world go by, and I thought, I think they've actually got this wrong.
Yeah,
I think they've got this wrong. So I went away and sat down with my team at the time and said, well, how about we look at this job differently to the way it's ever been looked at before? And at the time, they had a crushing contractor on site, they had a haulage contractor on site, they had a civil contractor on site.
All different?
All different.
Yep.
And I went back to them and went, hey, Gary, look, before we leave, I think you should probably have a look at this proposal. And I put a fully integrated proposal that effectively created a service offering in support of their processing facility that supported all their satellite mines and met all their needs under a single contractor. And he went, yeah, I like that, Murray. That's great. But I'm not going to give you a long-term contract. I'll give you 5 months to prove yourself, and if your model's pretty good, then we'll tender it.
Oh, take that.
But I backed myself in, right? I went, yep, no worries. Yep. I can't ask for any more than that, right?
You got a ticket to the game.
We got a ticket to the game.
Yep.
And so we got stuck into it. Myself and a couple other guys. One of the guys, Wayne Fisher's still with us now, who as one of our area managers. He came on as a project manager there. Another guy, Sean Smith, who's no longer, now out working for himself. We got in and we got stuck into this integrated service delivery for the Goldfields business, and ultimately proved to them very quickly that we were far more efficient than they were in terms of the way they planned to go about it. It integrated very well and become a key pillar for our business, and really cemented that integrated service offering wrapped around the processing facility that is core to who we are and how we go about it today.
And one-stop shop for them.
One-stop shop. And importantly, the thing that I don't think gets considered enough, Banners, is when you have a multitude of contractors on a site, it typically comes with a series of different contractual management requirements. So every contractor needs to be managed.
Yes.
Every contractor's got to have a HSMP that controls the safety framework that they work with under. Every contractor needs some sort of infrastructure on site to be able to support their fleet. When you transition back to a single supplier like we offer in the MLG model, they may be able to get single parts of the service cheaper, but on a holistic basis and a risk management basis, they get a single HSMP framework. So they only need one contract manager versus 3 or 4 contract managers, one set of support infrastructure on site, and they get the capacity to be able to, or the benefit of flexing fleet across a multitude of tasks. And that's really driven our organic growth year on year as we've integrated that across the industry. So,
Muzz, it's really interesting that the way it originated, but now you've rolled it out. Just give us an example. When I look at the way that MLG's evolved, I mean, if I was to go through, for example, your client base, okay, so Northern Star, Newmont, Goldfields, West Gold, Evolution, Genesis, New Murchison, Mount Gibson, Volt, Bellevue, Orabanda, Norton Gold, Fortescue, BHP, Roy Hill, Ramelius, FMR, Rio Tinto, to name a few. Are they all using this integrated one-stop shop?
Not every one of them. So we've got organisations where we're able to leverage a footprint, so neighbouring footprint as an example to, and I'll use our Kalgoorlie hub as a good example. We've got an operation for Evolution at their Mungari site where we're crushing, we're supplying aggregate and sand out of our quarries. We've got the bulk haulage operations. We feed their crushing plant. So we've got our own crushing plant there, plus we're feeding their crushing plant.
Yes.
We're doing all of their site roadworks and so forth. So it's an integrated model. But right next door, we've got our main Kalgoorlie hub, and we've got companies like FMR and so forth where we're flexing fleet in and out. The great part about that is we've got this cornerstone key customer, and they're one of a few. We've got Norton, we've got the Northern Star Callops that we all operate very similarly.
Yes.
But what we do for those guys is flex our fleet in an efficient way. So as they ebb and flow, we've got a team of people that are sitting in the Kalgoorlie office, and they will just turn assets on and off literally by the hour to be able to support the customer in the best way possible, but be as efficient as we possibly can be.
Yeah, it all makes sense. And this has evolved over time. And look, I just wanted to jump to that, but then move back to say, well, you got your first integrated contract and services supply. Then you had the crushing contract awarded to you by Fortescue, which was not long. So we're in 2014.
Yep. So we're first quarry established 2009.
Yeah.
Obviously that my time as a boilermaker welder, and this is where I talk about the fact that my skill set built. I spent a heap of time on crushing plants, right? So maintaining crushing plants and operating crushing plants is something I'd learnt through that process. We had this logistics business at the time. We were establishing a quarrying business, but it was we're going to supply the hard rock. We needed crushing equipment. So again, trotted off to the bank and bought some. So this was 2009. And we all know what was going on in the world in 2009.
Yeah, it was pretty tough.
It was very tough. And I wanted to buy 2 crushers, and this was actually the point in time that MLG became MLG, and it transitioned from what it was previously known as. So prior to that, it was known as lay haulage. And I'm standing at the back at the bank again, wanting to borrow some money to buy some crushers to establish a crushing division. Anyway, it got to credit, and credit were, well, it's a haulage business. What are they doing here? Well, there's an easy way to fix this. Let's change the name. So I'm standing in the doorway of my accountant, who was based in Kalgoorlie at the time, and I said, right, Greg, we can get this money, but they won't lend it to a haulage business. They want to lend it to a business that's got a different name. As simple as that sounds. And he said, well, let's change the name. And he said, well, what are we going to call it? And I just said, I don't know. And he said, well, what about MLG, Murray Leahy Group? Yeah, right, that'll do. And that's as simple as it was, and that's how it came about. So changed the name, went back to the bank, borrowed the money. The first quarrying division and crushing division was established end of 2009. Grew very quickly, as it typically does. Our aggregate business was growing materially out of the back of our quarrying operations at Leonora. And I'll go back to that in a minute, because there's a story in that too that is worth telling. But effectively, we grew capacity. The iron ore price was starting to rip, and we had the likes of Fortescue looking for all sorts of additional surge capacity that they could get. And we commenced work in 2014 at Fortescue with mobile crushing plant, crushing at the peak sort of 1 million tonne a month of direct shippable ore. So.
Goodness me. The Fortescue contract, though, did just sort of establish that as a significant revenue stream for the business. Yeah,
so it evolved over time. So when we first started, it was ad hoc. We were there with mobile equipment, and we ran along for a period of years. And as part of that, we're operating mobile fleet. When we first went to Fortescue, there were 6 different contractors just at Christmas Creek alone. Yeah, we were one of those 6. But over time, they all dropped away, and we became the last man standing. And then it actually transitioned. So just prior to COVID, so we've fast forwarded a fair few years here. We've been on site for 5 or 6 years at this point in time. Yep. They came to us and said, look, we need to get more efficient with this. We want to transition from mobile fleet to a build, own, operate electric plant structure. And we went, well, great, that's great, because we were running on 5-6 month contracts just rolling over. So we went about negotiating and then ultimately signing a build, own, operate for sort of 10 to 12 million tonnes per annum of capacity fixed crushing plants on site at Fortescue.
Which is still in operation today.
It's actually not. So there's a whole story in that too.
Right,
so,
okay.
And I'll keep this one as short as I possibly can. But so we signed the contract, went about procuring the plants, commenced construction. So at the time, it was sort of $30 million worth of capital that we were chewing off, which was a lot for the business.
Absolutely.
And this little thing called COVID hit.
Oh.
And so we were 3/4 of the way through construction when COVID hit, and all the challenges that we all know now came with that. But interestingly, we got going. So we had when COVID hit, we had one plant going. So it was 2 plants side by side. We had one plant going. We were halfway through the construction of the second one, and they come to us quite quickly and went, "Hey, we've had a blend change." So one thing that COVID forced all the steel producers to do is change their blends to suit whatever ore they could get.
Yes.
We've had a blend change come out of marketing. We're actually going to wind back our production at Christmas Creek.
Oh. And you're 3/4 of the way through.
3/4 of the way through construction on one of the plants. So,
yeah.
Incidentally, this happened to align with only a few months after we'd listed too, just quietly. So,
when it rains, it pours.
So it was a bit of a perfect storm that put us in a situation whereby we'd run along for a 6-year period with mobile crushing plant on site. We had these 2 big blue shiny fixed crushing plants that were absolutely smashing through the material by this point in time. We'd got we finished through the negotiation phase. We'd finished the second construction, and they were both then in production. But ultimately, they came to an end sort of 9 months into a 3-year contract. So.
But what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. I suppose from that perspective, you learnt.
Yeah, we learnt. There's a whole story that I probably won't go through today, where we're talking about the adversity and the challenge of dealing with such a large counterparty that's putting you through a really tough contractual fight, really.
Yeah.
As you lead up to to put it into context, the first phone call about a change to the mine plan came 6 hours after we listed on listing day.
Right.
So the decision wasn't made there and then. It took another sort of 5 months to play out. But talk about high of highs and low of lows. Just been down this 4-year journey to list the business on the ASX. Biggest customer rings up and says, "Hey, we've got a mine plan issue," like 6 hours later, right? So the reality of that is, for us through that period, yes, it was very challenging, but the business had an instilled fortitude and structure in place to be able to deal with those challenges. And what my team was able to do, which I'm immensely proud of, and when I look back, it was a real defining moment for the business. We were able to swing and really focus the team on where we needed to focus, and ensure that in the 12 months post that event, our business grew another 15%, and we lost 40% of our revenue
through that contract.
So, they put 55, 56% of growth on in a year, which is an amazing achievement and something that everyone that was involved in it should be proud of, right? I know I personally am, and I just happen to be one member of it. But there was a fair few dark days, weeks and months as we trailed our way through that, and a lot of time both spent strategizing, but looking at how many levers we could pull to be able to drive the business out the other side of it. So.
Muzz, that brings us pretty much up to the moment in 2021 where you were going to list the company. And it's interesting you talk about staff and the momentum that was gained after a setback and how they were able to rally together and put on an amazing show of resistance and growth within the business. I suppose 2 questions. Firstly, when you look back at that 2021 time and you'd grown the business so much, starting in 2002, and here we are nearly 20 years later, and you're listing the business on the ASX. It must have felt like a proud moment. I would imagine you were feeling like, wow, I can't believe it.
It's a journey, right? It's probably worth stepping back a little bit to talk about the drivers. The journey to our business being listed actually came about through a pivotal moment in time. I just spoke about the build, own, operate crushing facility that we built for Fortescue, but previous to that, we had been in negotiations with our cornerstone customer about a very similar opportunity that existed in their iron ore operations too. And it was a long negotiation over a long period of time, and we got to the point where we were the preferred supplier subject to exec sign-off. So we were immensely excited about the fact that we were going to be given an opportunity to go and build a fixed crushing plant in the middle of the heart of the Pilbara. And what happened is it got to the exec, and the exec came back and said, "Look, we really love what you have presented here. However, we've got a private entity versus another entity that was public as our competitor at the time. MLG, prior to listing, was a one-share business, and I owned it, and all the personal guarantees sat with me. So at the time, sort of north of $50 million in PGs. So I know what the stress of personal guarantees is all about. And ultimately, they made a decision to go in a different direction. And we had a review meeting out of the back of that with the procurement team that we're working with. And they sat down and just said, "Look, this is where this stacks up. We've worked our way through it. This is the decision that the execs made. They're going to go with the public listed entity, and the reason for that is the key person risk that they see sitting with you, Murray, and the fact that you're a single shareholder.
Yeah.
So I quite cranky, disgruntled, whatever you want to. I'm not a great loser. I will admit that, Vanners. I'm a very, very poor loser.
You wanted that contract.
Yeah, I wanted it right or wrong. Right? I walked out of the big building that's in Brookfield Place and went walking down the street and went, what does this mean for us?
Yep.
It actually created a situation where in the weeks post that I stood back and started to think about where I really wanted to be. I talked earlier on about the fact that there was no real clear business plan.
Yeah.
And it's been an evolutionary sort of growth profile that's driven our business along the way. It's the first point in time that I stood back. So this is end of 2018 and went, righto, where to from here? What are we going to do? And the thing that sort of really resonated with me outside of that, removing that key person risk, was I had this great team that I wanted to see share in the benefits.
Yes.
I love what I was doing, but that personal guarantee element, when you go to bed and get out of bed for years on end with 30, 40, $50 million worth of personal guarantees
hanging over your head,
it's a great motivator.
Yep.
But it's a heavy weight to carry, right? And as part of that, I just looked at it and went, right, we need to take this business strategically in the next direction that it needs to go in. I had very much grasped that we had a very unique service offering that didn't exist across industry. I was, we had strategically placed ourselves well throughout the whole of Western Australia, and we're starting to look at Northern Territory by that point in time. And we were being seen as the go-to entity to be able to deliver the suite of services that we were looking to deliver, or that we were delivering. However, the scale of the opportunities being provided were larger and larger and larger,
yes.
and this key person risk kept
bigger
popping
and
up,
bigger,
bigger and bigger. So, I stood back and went, where do we go? And I looked at all the options. I looked at a potential trade sale and exiting and spending my life catching barramundi. Well, catching barramundi is great fun, but you can't do it all year round. I looked at the team of people that I had and went, right, I want to share some of this. So I want to see them have the opportunity to be able to create some form of wealth for themselves, but in a way that they're required to work for it, right? So, to be able to have a good and strong STI, LTI framework and REM structure, remove some of the risk and create a platform to be able to raise equity to be able to grow the business further. So up until that point in time, there had never been a single cent of external equity come into the business. The business had grown from 0 employees to north of 700 employees at the time, sort of 300 million of revenue, and it all grown 100% organically with just reinvestment of generated profits to buy a fleet and grow. And using HP debt to buy equipment, basically, on a rapid amortization basis. So as part of that, I went out and started investigating the path forward. I looked at some private equity. I looked at high net worth family office investment. But ultimately, we landed on the listing scenario because it gave us every element that we're looking to trying to achieve, right?
Liquidity,
the
whole works.
Share structure to be able to build into a STI LTI framework, allowed me to maintain some control, and allowed some of our customers to get involved too, which they did through the process. So
it must. To have a business at that level though, that was generating the revenue, generating the ability to substantiate a listing, must have felt great, but then to be able to share it with the staff that had been on the journey with you, because I understand at the time of IPO, it was in excess of between 10 and 20 of your original staff.
We're still there.
Still there.
Yep, exactly.
And they're all able to be a part of it.
All able to be part of it. So both bought in and gifted shares as well as part of it in recognition of the work done. So
wonderful.
It was a great moment, but also not. it was a great moment, but the one that made me most immensely proud was when our first LTI actually vested just not that long ago. It was only a few months ago. So
Is that right?
it vested in the money, and I just watched how elated a whole bunch of people that have worked really hard were about seeing that come to fruition.
Yeah.
And over and above everything in the journey, that is something that I will take with me forever in seeing, being able to talk to them about what my goal was and my dream was, to see them work through the process. And that journey of, having those issued performance rights under our LTIP, and then them having to stick the fortitude, or stick to the process with fortitude as they watched our share price dip, and they watched this language, and
keep the faith,
and then have them paid at the back of it, was a very, very, very rewarding thing for me personally, and something that I got a huge amount of enjoyment out of watching happen. So.
Oh, well, for the listener, Muzz's body language is just oozing pride, I would say. Muzz, I can see it's an emotional topic because there's a lot of people who hung their hat on your leadership.
Yeah, look, I've been very fortunate throughout my life to have a lot of great people that have been part of my team and have supported me, and that over and above anything else, Tim, that's what gets me going every day. It's you need to deliver financially, but it's amazing how when you get the actual chemistry right, the financial deliverance is just a byproduct of high quality delivery, safely, efficiently, with a team that really enjoys doing it right. The financial benefits flow when you get the rest of it right.
That formula.
Thanks for listening to Euroz Hartleys Finding the Front. This podcast is for general information purposes only. Please check out eurozhartleys.com for more information. Euroz Hartleys holds Australian Financial Services Licence 230052.